try to make rational decisions. Do not make decisions based on emotion. I know how hard that can be, but you have to do your best to keep a level head at all times and make the best decisions that you can possibly make based on your situation for your kids.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. I'm your host, Corey Ward. Welcome once again to the Dadography podcast. Today we have a special guest on our show, Mr. Kenneth Wade, who hails from the United States of America. He'll give us some more specifics here in just a moment. I'm your host, Corey Ward, and please sit back, enjoy the show, and do all you can to gain as many insights and tips on fatherhood as possible from this conversation with Kenny Wade. Kenny, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate you.
Well, it's certainly good to have you here. I know we've had some personal conversations, some one-on-one conversations, I should say, and it's been good to get to know you as a friend. And now I look forward to getting to know you as a father. Why don't you tell the fathers that are listening out there a little bit about yourself and help us to get to know you, man?
Well, I guess you could say come from humble beginnings, living in the South. Joined the military at about 18, 19 years old. Did almost 29 years in the military, total time. Married, divorced, 2 kids from that marriage, and later on had another child. So at this time, I have 3 kids. I'm pretty active in their lives. You know, I've had a stellar career. I can't say it's been easy all the time as far as being a father. You know, it's been rewarding, but it's also been challenging, and it's been at times been very stressful. Went through a lot early on after the divorce and everything. So, but as I look back, I wouldn't want to repeat anything like that, but I learned a lot from it, and I think it has made me stronger and brought up me and my kids together in the end. Not as close as we could be overall, but, you know, like I say, it's always a work in progress, you know.
I hear you. So you say you spent 29 years in the military. What was your profession, if you don't mind me asking, Kenny?
Well, I started out in the Navy. I did 10 years active duty Navy, then went into the Navy Reserves for a little while, then switched over to the Army Reserves, and then went full-time Army and stayed another 16 years in the Army. Wow. In the Navy, I was I guess you could say today that would be considered an IT or something like that, you know.
Okay.
We was in charge of like all top secret message traffic and stuff like that. So when I joined the Army, I came in as a finance soldier, you know, doing finance, and then switched over to being a career recruiter. And I did recruiting for 16 years.
Oh, man, that's one hell of a resume, I'll tell you, Ken. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, let me ask you, was your father military?
No, you know, I have I don't know if it's how unique it is, but my biological parents did not raise me. The lady that raised me, her and her husband were best friends of my grandmother.
Okay.
So my grandmother wasn't able to take care of me, her own daughter, and my other sister. But I'm come from an era where it was definitely community. So people looked out for each other. So she knew that my mother could not have kids, which was her friend, could not have kids. And a child that she was raising prior to that, the mother came back and took the child back. So she stepped to my mother and said, hey, you can raise my grandson as yours, and you never have to worry about his mother ever coming back to take him. So that was pretty much it in a nutshell.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's,
those 2 people, they were no relation to me. They reared me from the time I was 3 months old up until I was 19.
So it was an adoption, unofficial.
It was an unofficial adoption.
Okay.
I always knew who my mother was, my biological mother was. I grew up in the same town with my my sister and my aunts and a whole host of other cousins. So it was like everybody in the community knew who I was. So yeah.
Okay, now you said earlier you're from the South. We're in the South, Kenny.
Mississippi.
So you did not grow up with your biological parents. There was a very unique circumstances or arrangement of events that allowed you to be with this couple
Right.
who determined that they would raise you.
Uh-huh.
And what was that like? What was the father figure like in that household?
It was me and her biological nephew, so we kind of grew up as brothers. So it was two of us. As
Okay.
far as my father, the man that I know as my father,
Hmm.
he was cool. He was calm. He liked to have fun, but he was a hands off dad and a hands on dad at the same time. He would give you your leverage to get in trouble, and then if you go too far, then he'd step in. He
Okay.
was like the final say. So if I got out of control and she couldn't handle me, she would pass me on to him, and then he would step in, and then he would shut it down.
If you had to put it in your own words, Kenny, how would you describe your fatherhood style?
I would say, it's like sometimes you don't know how much you learn from a person until many years later you find yourself falling back on how your father did things or treated you, that kind of stuff. So I guess
Right.
my style is kind of, it was very active early on, when me and my ex-wife were together, even though I did work a lot, but since then, it hasn't been as hands-on, and it has caused a strain on the relationship due to a, series of events in the early years up until about 10, 12 years ago. So I'll have to tell you that story. I had,
Okay.
to that. Yeah.
Okay. So your fatherhood style at one point was active. Obviously, after the divorce and separation, there's a period where the dynamic of the fathering changes as a whole. What do you think was the impact of your father or the gentleman that was playing that role on the way that you were fathering, whether during the active period or the period where you guys were separated?
I think that he kind of gave me a guide, like a blueprint. I would always reflect back on, I wonder what he would do in this situation. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
he was always how can I say, kind of a stoic type of guy. I was always more emotional. I always wanted to let my feelings be known, so I had to fall back a bit, and it has been tough. So the mistakes I made with the two previous kids, I tried to, I don't know, in some way maybe I a little bit overcompensated with the youngest child, since I reared her up until she was about 7 or 8,
Okay.
and we are still close to this day.
Now you've mentioned that you were divorced with the first two children, well, with the first two children's mother. And take me on a journey, man. Help me to understand what's happening at this time. Are the kids, as the relationship starts to get rocky, do you have the kids in mind? What are you experiencing?
Wow, whew. Okay. My kids were born in California. I was stationed in California. They were military brats, so to speak. The relationship began to get rocky, so the wife and I decided to separate. So we separated. She left California and she moved back to Illinois. I left California eventually and moved to Philadelphia, and she and I came back together. We were together for about 2 years at that time before the military sent me away to Maine. Now, I was going to Maine for 8 or 9 months, so it didn't make any sense to move the family up there. So she ended up moving back to Illinois. So the relationship was always kind of rocky, you know what I mean? So we were getting to argue all the time, and then I was always being threatened with, I want a divorce type of thing. So I always wanted to reconcile. It was like I wanted to be in a marriage, and at the same time I didn't. But I still wanted to do the right thing on behalf of my children. I wanted to be there for them. So it was very emotional during that time. I consulted my mother and everybody about, man, do I stay? Do I go? This is tough. So
Mm.
she moved back to Illinois. And then when I got out the military at that time, I moved to Illinois, but she was supposedly had been putting away the money, and I didn't really check on stuff, putting away the money to go get to move out from my parents' house and get a place so that when I got there, everything would be squared away. But that didn't happen. So I ended up having to move in with her parents and my two kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it started out great. Me and her father was having some issues. You know, he insulted my, I guess you could say, my manhood at the time. And then I felt like kind of being maybe less of a man because here I am, a grown man. I got to stay in another man's house. And then I'm mad at her because, well, what happened to the money you've been getting all this time? You could have been saving up for this and that. So a lot of things, it was just bad.
You know, you said earlier that you definitely had the kids in mind in terms of just trying to make decisions because, you know, you wanted to be in the relationship, didn't want to be in the relationship, but you were very mindful of the kids and their well-being. So all this is happening. You guys moved from California, now you're in Illinois. What's kind of happening in terms of the day-to-day fathering? Like what's happening or what's not happening?
Well, you have to, if you can picture me going to work when I could get work, you know, because I was out of the military at that time, but I did start working at like UPS as I don't know what you call those people now, but you're not full time. You're just kind of there. You're working, you know. And when I would get off, I would spend as much time with my kids as I could, and we would go to the park. Me and my son, we go play basketball. I took my daughter on a trip to Chicago with me when I went that first time to visit my biological mother, and you know, so I was there. I was present. It was like I said, man, it's hard trying to be any type of who you are in another man's space, if you get what I'm saying. It's like it's hard for me to be a father, be that guy I wanted to be, and be up in that house. So I guess you could say I had a lot of resentment because I felt like she didn't do what she was supposed to do.
Now, when the divorce is finalized and you guys are living obviously separate places, what's happening with at that time? What is the visitation situation like, or are the kids with you, or kind of help me to get a bird's eye view from there?
What happened was when I left and moved to Chicago, I would call to talk to my kids very often. And sometimes I'd be able to talk to them, sometimes I wouldn't. And then at other times, she would intervene in the conversations. I could be talking to my daughter or my son or both, and she would be interjecting. You know, it was very toxic. And I even had to say to her on a number of occasions, why are you talking to me that way while I'm on the phone with my son? And why are you talking that way in front of the kids?
Right.
Whatever beef you got with me, we can discuss it at another time, but not while I'm trying to have some kind of relationship with them. And see, that was putting strain on the relationship. It was seeming like it was saying, oh, when my kids thought of me, oh, daddy bad. Because every time I'm on the phone, I'm fighting with their mother. You know what I mean? So
right. There's some psychological things that are taking place here on the kids. Exactly. As a result of the conversations that are taking place between you and your mom. And perhaps, who knows, man? I mean, obviously we're not, we would have to ask them, but to some degree at that time, based on what you're saying, you felt like there was some resentment that was being built up from the kids towards you.
Yeah, and many years, a few years later, proved that point, and as time went on, I was absent from my kids' lives for a number of years because I got tired of every time I tried to go and have any type of communication with them, I would be hit with a roadblock, like, a barrier.
Right,
So
right.
as time went on, it was like every other relationship I had after that, it would kind of be, well, especially if that woman had kids, it's like, well, how can I be so great to these kids and I don't have a relationship with my own kids?
Let me segue here just a little bit because I want to address what perhaps is a very common narrative on fathers when there's a separation from the mother. And it would appear to be from one side that the father doesn't care about his kids.
Right,
He has vacated the premises, leaving them absent,
right,
and he has really no concern for them other than making sure that he does the basics.
right.
And from what I'm getting from you, there sounds like while you were in Chicago, there was a lot going on emotionally and wanted to be able to spend time with your kids, talk with your kids. But whether it was intentional or not intentional, we definitely not trying to address that. But it seems like the ex-wife was a huge roadblock for making that happen.
Yeah, whatever resentment she had for me, whatever issues she had with me as being, I don't know, a good husband, good father, whatever she rationalized in her mind, I can't really say at this point, but I know how I was feeling at the time. It's like,
Mm,
well, you're blocking me from seeing my kids. So I don't want to say went into seclusion. I kind of blocked it out for a while. It was always in the back of my mind,
right.
and it was tough to deal with. Like I say, I've been in a few relationships since then, and if the female had kids, it would bother me until one female told me one time. She said,
Hmm.
if you don't get it right with them, none of your other relationships are going to work out. You need to get it right with your kids.
Right.
So, long story short, I set up one day and I wrote a letter to my daughter and a letter to my son, each letter being about 5 or 6 pages each. And I
This
said,
is handwritten now. This
I,
isn't email.
I hand wrote those letters to them. The letter to my son was for my son. It wasn't like
Hmm.
I copied and pasted and just put their names in there.
Yeah.
I tailored each letter to what I really wanted to say to each one of them. So I said to myself, I say, any response I get, even if it's negative, is still a step in the right direction because at least I got a response.
Okay.
That's how I felt about it.
So it would probably be on your shoulders like the weight of the world, and it feels like you're the only one going through this. But as we're speaking to dads, Kenny, the reality is some relationships don't work out. Some of them are marriages that are being turned into divorces, and some of them are relationships that are just splitting up. But there are kids in the middle, and a lot of times the dad is in a situation where he's made to be or appears to be the bad guy, and you're not the only one. So,
Right.
what advice would you give to guys that are going through these turbulent waters right now?
Well, I would say no matter what we're going through, as much as we think we're the only one, in my case, maybe I thought I was the only one, but I know that my situation was not unique. I would say to those men out there, young or old, is to try to make rational decisions. Do not make decisions based on emotion. I know how hard that can be, but you have to do your best to keep a level head at all times and make the best decisions that you can possibly make based on your situation for your kids. I mean, that's about the only thing I can actually say because I know my own situation back then, the way I handled things back then, I would be the total opposite today. In
Okay.
other words, a lot of the decisions I made back then were based purely on emotion.
Mm,
So I had to learn to take the emotion out of the decision making process, no matter what it is.
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Because when you're emotional, you just jump and do things that make a decision, a rash decision that you will sooner or later regret that you made it. You should have thought it through first. And that's kind of how I live today is just, hey, I try to think everything through, not let myself get emotionally tied to an outcome.
Well, Kenny, I think that word of encouragement gives guys a focal point. Like you said, it's not something that's going to be attained from one day to the next, but that focal point of saying, okay, I need to make sure that I'm putting my best foot forward on making decisions, not from an emotional standpoint, but from the standpoint of, okay, logic and, what's going to be best for the kids.
Yeah, that's bottom line. After I wrote those letters and I got a negative response back from my ex-wife and my son, who at the time—
Tell me about that. Tell me
Yes.
about that. Take me there, man.
Yeah. One day I'm sitting in my car and I get this call out of the blue, and it's my ex-wife on the phone along with my son. First thing out of her mouth is, "Where have you been?" This kind of stuff, and kind of poking at me or whatever. And
Is
I—
your son present? I'm just asking.
yes, he's present. And the
Lord have
first
mercy.
thing my son got on the phone and said to me was, "Where have you been and why did you cheat on my mom?"
Hey guys, this is Corey, host of the Dadography podcast. This episode is sponsored by and dedicated to you. Thanks for all your feedback and support. I mean that. However, if this is your first time tuning in, please be sure to subscribe. And if you've done that already and you're getting some value from our interviews with dads from around the globe, please share. Teamwork makes a dream work. Now back to the show. Oh, wow.
He was probably about 14 then. And I said to him, first of all, "Who told you that?" And of course, he didn't answer. I'm glad I had that, whatever kind of conversation that was. I didn't get all emotional. I specifically said to my ex-wife, when she said to me, she said, "Well, he doesn't want you in his life. You haven't really been there. You turn your back on your kids." And, a little emotionalism got in there. And I said, "No, I never turned my back on my kids. I turned my back on you." And I said, first of all, my son is not making the decision on whether I want to be in his life. You are making that decision for him. Kids change their minds all the time. You want something one day, you don't want it the next. And then I was just basically like, no problem. I'll talk to you guys later. And I knew then what I needed to do. So I contacted an attorney. And when that attorney called me or whatever, it happened to be a female. Actually, I was relieved that it was a female because maybe she can really empathize with me at that point. At least that was my thinking at the time. And she's not going to feel sorry for my ex-wife. It was crazy, man. And my ex-wife, finally, we went to court. And well, I didn't have to sit one day in court, but my attorney went to court for me. And my ex-wife went to court. Now, here's something key. She went to court and said before a judge that I never paid child support, which is incorrect. So what they did at the time, they went in and subpoenaed my ex-wife's bank account, froze her accounts, and presented that to the judge that she had been receiving X amount of dollars for the past 6 or 7 years.
Kenny, this is getting sticky, man.
This is actual facts, bro.
Okay. So this is going on. I know you mentioned you got the negative response from your son, but I'm aware that you wrote another 5-6 page letter to your daughter. What's going on there?
Actually, I didn't hear anything from my daughter during that period. I wasn't talking to my kids at all during that period. So basically, in a nutshell, the judge at that point saw through the madness. It's like, you're saying this man is not paying, but it's showing right here that he's paying. What do you have to say to that? And of course, she went in, "He hasn't been there. He hasn't done this. He hasn't done that." And the judge was like, "The fact of the matter is, you haven't proved anything that says this man was abusive to his kids or anything like that." So the judge came out with this thing here. He said, Mr. Wade will be able to talk to his son twice a week in a private conversation And you are not to ask what the conversation was about, and you are not to intervene in any way. And if you are, you will be in contempt of court.
Oh my.
Yeah. And so after that, the child support went up. I said, you know what? It's whatever it is, it's not even about the money at this point. It's about me and them knowing the truth that I never abandoned them. So after that, Corey, I ended up planning a trip to go and visit my kids.
Kenny, let me interject right here. I think you have paved a path that must be addressed. And for the listeners out there, the reason I'm pausing the conversation with Kenny specifically is so that if you have found yourself in a situation where your children have been made to believe that you abandoned them, it is paramount that you take action to ensure that they know otherwise. Go ahead, Kenny.
So I planned a trip to go and visit them, worked it out with my ex-wife. They know I'm coming. On the first day there, I go to my ex-wife's house. My son is sitting there. My daughter's sitting there, and we all sitting around in the room. There was no like, oh, hugs and kisses and none of that. And I said that I'm happy to be here, happy to see you guys, blah 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 blah. And then my ex-wife began to ask, well, so how's it been? I mean, all this phoniness. How's it been? Blah blah blah. Then she wanted to lower the hammer on me in front of the kids. She said, so where have you been? Why haven't you this and that? And I knew then. I said, whatever comes out of my mouth next, it's got to be calculated. Right? So
Right.
I said to my son and my daughter, because even at that point, Corey, they never knew they was getting child support. They never knew. I said, thank you for inviting me into your home. And I said, I'm happy to be in front of my kids. It's been a long time. This is a glorious day. And I want you guys to know that none of this was ever about the money. The money has always been there. And I left it at that.
Right.
And then my kids are looking at each other like, what money? But it ended up being a great time. I got a chance to spend time with my daughter and my son, and like 2 years later, my son came to stay with me in New York while I was living in New York. He came to New York. He stayed, a couple of almost a month.
Wow.
Yeah, not well, about 2 weeks because he was out of school, so he came up and we hung out. And he and we're not as close as we could be, but we're still really, really cool to this day.
Okay. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there, Kenny. But I wanna roll back a little bit because now that's the two children you have from your marriage, right?
Right.
That ended up in divorce.
Right.
But even thereafter, there's a relationship that ensues, and there's another child.
Yeah, many years after.
Some experience now. Now I'm starting to get a feel for you because you've got some experience now. All right, you've been in a relationship, you've separated, tried to remote father. You've taken the stance of an individual determined to make sure that his children know the truth about his willingness and a desire to be their father. You've gone through some pain, and now you are in a situation now where you're in a relationship and you've got yourself another child.
Yeah, many years later, I entered into a new relationship. We were together for a long time. In the end, it just wasn't the ideal mix. We just couldn't put all that together, but we do co-parent. You know what I mean?
It sounds like it was totally different.
Yeah, it was totally different because even though she and I broke up, we had our issues. She always encouraged me having a relationship with my daughter, and sometimes she would say, hey, you thought about this, you might want to do this, why don't you do this? So she always would have ideas and stuff like that. So it was cool. And me and my daughter today, we could be better too, but it's still good.
There's a point where you said, all right, I know what I have to do. And you got an attorney and went for, visitation rights and things. And unfortunately, a lot of dads don't take that proactive of a stance. And so I was trying to, trace that back to where, like, was your dad giving you insight? I mean, what do you think what was the root of that? Was it just that immensity of love for the kids? Was it maybe what had nothing to do with father? Was it, getting back at her? I mean, what prompted that, man?
You know what? At that point, Corey, in my mind, she is a non-factor. And what prompted me to do or make the decision that I made, and it was an instant decision right after that phone call. I said, I already know what to do. I need to consult an attorney. It wasn't about getting her back or a vendetta. It was about doing the right thing, and I'm not going to just sit back and let myself be wronged out of a relationship with my kids.
Well, I applaud you for that, man. I really do. I applaud you for that. And I really hope that listening fathers will take a page out of your book and be willing to do the same for the sake of their kids, for the sake of their kids, ultimately, because as fathers, we hold that type of a value when we are able to take the steps necessary to show that we love our kids. So, yeah, definitely,
Yeah,
man.
and I know of a few other fathers that have been in, maybe not the exact, but similar situations. We living in a time where it's like walkover dads. And to be honest with you, during that time, I also was doing research on dads in court and dad trying to not beat the system, but trying to get the court decisions in their favor. That was a book I bought many years ago. I don't even have it anymore now. It was an organization called Fathers' Rights. So
Okay.
I subscribed to them a little bit. I was always on the computer looking for, just sources and things to do, and I think today we have to do our due diligence when you're going through something like that. And the biggest thing for me that I would impart to anybody is, man, just do your best to try to take the emotion out and just focus on the end result, on what you're trying to do.
Well, I just looked up something on the fathers' rights movement, and it's a movement primarily whose members, related to family law, child custody, things
Right.
of the sort. And
Mhm.
apparently they're still around, man.
So yeah, I mean, I was all on top of that back then, man. I would just, it's like with anything, when you get focused on something and you want to accomplish something, you just go for it. And
Yeah.
any information you can find on it is going to be in your arsenal. That's all.
So there were obviously, Kenny, some real challenging times, and I'm sure we've probably got a quarter of it, right, if that much.
Yeah.
But I'd like for you to take me to a place, a time, and a place you spent with your kids that was really memorable, past and present.
I could say with my son, starting with him,
Okay.
the biggest, I guess, impact we had was when, after all those years and all that fighting and all of that other stuff, he came to New York. I sent for him to come to New York, and we spent those 2 or 3 weeks together, just laughing and talking, and and I can't take my eyes off him. He looks like me. But the other thing too, right? I think he does struggle at times with coming into his own, because, and partially I blame myself for that, because I wasn't there all those years, and it's kind of hard to
Mm.
pick up for all that time with the grown man. Only thing you can do now is just hope he listens to you and follows at least some of your advice.
Now, with that being said, Kenny, it sounds like if a person needs to take action in spending time with their kids, it sounds like it's time sensitive.
Yeah, you need to do it, because being an absentee father, even if you're sending a check and seeing them once, I don't know, depending on your job, once a blue moon, it granted you're in their lives, but it's going to have an effect, in my
Mm.
opinion.
Okay.
It's nothing like being there every day and being that constant role model, so to speak.
Right.
You're part of the everyday activities. When they got an issue, they're coming straight to you. But when you don't live there, maybe they're not coming to you. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe they're dealing with issues as a young man that they're going to their mother for, and they should be coming to you for.
Well, from what I'm gathering from what you're saying, because obviously breakups happen, divorces happen, separations happen. If you, listener, are divorced, separated, any of the above, from Kenny's experience, it is in your best interest to make a full court press in order to spend as much time with your kids as possible.
Yes. The other moment I spent with my daughter, most memorable, the older daughter, is when she and I got in my vehicle and we did a road trip all the way to Chicago together. And that was
From where?
from Alton, Illinois. If I remember correctly, it's probably about 5 hours, something like that. And she was a little girl. She could have been more than like 3. And we went to visit my mother, my biological mother that lived in Chicago. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And your other daughter?
Oh, yeah. It's so many memories with her, but because most of them are so recent. But the one thing that stood out to me one day, two things. One day she told me in the mall, she said, "Dad, I need to make my own money," because she was about 15, because I get tired of asking you and my mom for money, right? To the point where she went and opened up her own little business and making money, And then
Wow.
another time we were together, she said to me, "Dad, I know you think sometimes I don't be listening to you, but I listen." She said, "Watch me." I said, "Okay, yeah." So she's doing her thing, man, and I couldn't be more proud.
So the kids have become adults, and the youngest is a teenager.
Well, she's 18 now. She goes to Temple University.
Okay, so 18, yeah, definitely. She's a young adult. So
Yeah.
you've got adults and young adult. How has the dynamic of the relationship with them changed from some of those turbulent times you went through there?
I'll put it like this. Those turbulent times, and you said something earlier, and I'm going to say this. It's imperative that you do a full court press and don't wait too late, because those turbulent times are affecting my relationships with my kids to this day, because you wasn't always there, and you can't make up for the years. It's hard to make up for those years of absence.
Right.
It's tough, man, and because you want them to see you as dad, they call you dad, but sometimes it seems like the relationship is not always, in my mind, it's not always where I desire it to be,
Right.
And sometimes I don't have all the answers on how to get there. You call as much as you can, you try to stay in contact, but you don't want to be overbearing at the same time. You want your kids to come to you when they need things instead of going outside of you trying to find answers, especially daughters. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I get the full court press, man. Without that, there it seems like there's a potential for there to be a gap in the intimacy of the father-child relationship.
Yeah, no doubt. Once they become adults, coming into adulthood, they begin to start doing their own thing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So you need to get a grip on them prior to that, and have a relationship, because once they start gaining their own independence, and some of that independence could be independent of you.
Very much so. Well, the dynamic has changed. You guys are in communication now. What you think that is the primary, and not that you weren't in communication before, but I mean, clearly the dynamic have changed. What do you think is probably the number one contributing factor? Just age, the roadblocks being out of the way?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. It's like many years of absence and steadily trying to build. At sometimes you feeling like your kids are not on the same page with you. You're pursuing them, and it seems like they're, I don't know, I don't want to say running away from you, but they're not. You want to just know that the same love you have for them, you sometimes question whether they have it for you. Then I had to take a step back and say, you know what? They're grown now. They need me. They'll let me know. I'll call them, see how they're doing. If they need something, I do my best to help. And that's pretty much been it. I love them to death, and they know it. And my
Okay.
son just texted me a couple of days ago, let me know he was okay and that he loved me. So that's
Yeah,
all I can ask for.
hearing "I love you" from your son, that's a highlight for sure, man. For
Yeah,
sure, for sure, highlight. Yeah.
absolutely.
I had the good fortune not long ago of getting a call from my son, and he just expressed to me his appreciation for me as a dad, and just being able to be there for him as a mentor. But it floored me because just it's my son. To
Yeah.
hear, you put in the effort. You try to tell him the right things or do the right things for him, etc. But to hear the gratitude from them is very rewarding, man. Can I tell you what, man? It's given me a lot to think about. Those are some waters that at present I'm treading those waters with my youngest son,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it's been challenging. But I think I'm gonna have to take the page out of your book, or make the highlight, and just go through the proper legal channels so that I can have greater access to them. I don't know. Pre-COVID, we did have an awesome summer. We had a chance to go on a cruise together and spend some time, and
Oh wow.
I was able to tell him face to face, listen, you are more than willing to come live with me. I want that. I love you. So I've been able to solidify, I think, for him, anything that may have been told contrary to that, as being, so I've been able to solidify the reality of the fact that I love him, want to be with him. And so what I've got to do, though, is I've got to do what you did, and I've got to take that step and being proactive. And my wife who's a real trooper, real supportive. She's told me, you got to do this, you got to do this. And it's been something I wanted to do, but obviously living in one country, him living in another, is one thing, and so it's been some challenges. But I'm not prepared to hold on to any of those challenges anymore as a reason to perhaps complicate things for him psychologically down the line,
Mm-hmm.
uh, or our relationship. I mean, I'm hearing some things from your experience, and I'm like, you know what? I gotta put this into effect. I gotta make sure that I'm implementing what I'm getting from Kenya here. So I appreciate that, man. I thank you very much for
Hey,
coming
no
on the show.
problem.
The transparency. I don't know, man. Here lately, we've been having some conversations with some guys, and these guys, including yourself, have just laid it all out there, and I appreciate that because not every situation is, a happily ever after with the picket fence. So we have to be able to father under fire.
I like that. You have to be able
Yeah.
to father under fire.
So I appreciate you, Kenny. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Let me ask you this before I let you go, man. Do you have any more words of encouragement to the listening fathers that might be with us today?
Basically, you just make your kids a priority and love them to death. I don't know if that's a good way to say that, but love them to your best ability and do all you can to be in their lives, and you may have to make a few sacrifices, and if someone is impeding your relationship with your kids, then you got to be prepared to take it to the next level. Is that simple? Sometimes people will only listen to authority.
Right.
You hate to go that route, but sometimes you have no choice. You don't want to wallow in misery either.
That's some wise advice. Thank you very much for coming on to Dadography, Kenny. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to being able to implement some of the insights and tools that you've given us today in our own personal lives to become better fathers.
Right.
Thanks, everybody, once again for listening to the Dadography podcast. I'm your host, Corey Ward. Thank you. Take care.
Wow, turbulent waters indeed. Like Kenny said, if you find yourself navigating these, do your best to leave your emotions out of the equation and stay level-headed to make the best decisions. Don't forget the end goal is always to become a better father and be there for your kids. So take action to ensure your kids know the truth about the moves you are making to be there for them. Be hands-on and be active as soon and as much as possible with them. Did someone say full court press? And if you're still on the fire, then the legal route could prove to be beneficial to your goal. Good looking out, Kenny. See you all next week.